Writing is about the process. It's about listening and recognizing remnants of your story in the stories of others. When we share our stories with each other, we share the resonance of the human experience. The By Firelight podcast is your invitation to join our circle, a circle of writers, poets, seekers, and storytellers as we capture our living in words. This multifaceted living with joy, grief, love, growth, and loss is shared among us in your legacy, your story. The things you choose to do with your days as they unfold matter here. I'm your host, Betsy Delzer. I'm many things, but in this gathering, I'm a painter, poet, and writer, and I'm honored to be your guide through these episodes. Together, we'll find our muses in the rich and heart-expanding conversations with incredible guests, many who are like minds and all outrageously inspiring hearts. When you press play, you're here in the circle to share this space with us. By Firelight. Today we are with Joanna Hutchins. Joanna is a certified Journal to the Self instructor. She's a physician assistant, functional medicine practitioner, wife, sister, and mother of 2 children. She finds purpose and joy in helping people understand not only how their bodies work, but also their minds. She currently enjoys teaching various types of journaling techniques and workshops designed to help people discover themselves. Journaling is a helpful self-discovery tool to many that Joanna enjoys teaching because she believes that the more you can understand and be kind to yourself, the more you can extend understanding and kindness to others. Joanna, I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Beth.
We have the tremendous gift and honor of being friends since almost childhood, really. Thinking back to 20 years ago when we began this leg of the journey together, where was that in your evolution as a writer? You've had such a winding path in your career and in your self-exploration and discovery and such. If you think back to sort of adolescence and teens, did you consider yourself a writer back then?
I don't know if I considered myself a writer per se, but writing definitely helped me process. That's kind of how I've always enjoyed writing and how writing has been a part of my life, is that it's been more of a purging and a processing for me. Not necessarily that I'm creating these amazing works of art that other people are going to read and be like, wow, that sounds so beautiful, but more just what am I feeling right now? Why? How do I move through this? What does that look like? And so in my teens, I think it was still very helpful and useful to write. And a lot of entries have to do with boy troubles and whatnot and school angst and all of that. But yeah, as I got older, there was a huge chunk of time where the busyness of life and the pace of everything just was too much. So I just had a major halt. Once my oldest son, Max, was born, and through those years when he was young and when my daughter, Lexi, was born, there was probably about a 7-year gap of where there just wasn't much written, just because everything was too busy and I just couldn't find the space. And even when I had the space, I was just too tired to even think about picking up a pen.
So if I am kind of tracking with you a little bit, it sounds like throughout the course of the decades, you are a process-oriented writer. Would that be accurate? You sort of process what's going on, your feelings, what's happening through the writing, and not necessarily thinking about a creative production, but you're really processing what's happening internally. Is that?
Totally. Yep. I think when I was much younger, I had thought, I even have some things written down from when you're a little kid and you're like, what do I want to be when I grow up? I think that I used to think I was going to be more of on the creative writer end of maybe I'll write a book or, this or that. But I find myself more drawn to nonfiction and memoir style books. So if I ever did write something, it would probably be kind of in my, tone of voice and more of my story as opposed to a full fictional tale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally see that for you. So then you've also been a part of this writing group for about 20 years, where in and out using Springboard prompts and then sort of capturing in community what it is you're experiencing in that moment. How has that shaped your evolution and just journey?
Truly, being part of Spilling was probably my only writing outlet for those, about 7-year window when I had little kids. And so I'm really glad that I had that, because I look back on those entries and those writings and I'm like, oh yeah, like that was a tricky part of life. Or I do remember feeling this way. I'm really grateful that I've been in the group for as long as I have, because I do have a little bit of, remembrance of earlier years with kids and whatnot. But I think that it has helped me because I've realized one, how much I like springboards and, that as a specific type of journaling technique. And I think because I got so much out of the group, it was during COVID when all of a sudden I kind of became unemployed relatively quickly, and the kids were at home and doing virtual school, that I was like, oh my gosh, I need an outlet again, and started journaling. And so it was through kind of realizing how helpful journaling was again to me when difficult times arose as a mental health tool, and then just kind of started discovering how important journal therapy actually can be. So that tracked with my experience. I was like, yes, I very much feel that.
Yeah. Okay, there are a couple of directions I want to take us, and so I'm going to choose one path first. There's so much that you just said that I'm like, oh, I want to just dive in a little bit deeper. So, first of all, why don't we honor just the career that you've had, because we are going to end up kind of landing where you currently are. But I think it's also helpful for people to really identify with like, hey, I'm a medical professional, and, I may not necessarily see myself as a published author or, an avid writer at this moment in time, but my journey of my career has taken me down this one path. So let's just take a little bit of time to unpack the layers of your journey from, I mentioned it in your bio, but physician assistant to functional medicine practitioner, and then we can spend a little bit more time to where you currently are. You just mentioned it about COVID, but let's go back a little ways. So you said when you were little, you thought about maybe like a creative writing endeavor of some kind, and you ended up a little bit of ways from that, right? Yes. As a physician assistant. So tell us a little bit about that whole process.
Yeah. Well, one thing to know is that I grew up around medicine. My dad is an orthopedic surgeon. So from a very young age, I always liked medicine, and I liked the idea of healing somebody and giving them kind of their joy and zest for life back. And I would go to the hospital with my dad on weekends and help him make rounds and things on patients, when you used to be able to do that before HIPAA and all those laws were in place. So I was always fascinated by the body and how medicine can help treat the body. And as I got into high school and particularly college, it was kind of two separate paths. I was very much interested in social sciences and more art and literature and kind of, BA route. And then I was also still interested in medicine and the possibility of kind of going into something in the medical field. I shadowed a lot of different medical field careers just to kind of figure out, well, which one would be the most interesting to me. And ultimately, I thought, the arts are great, and the creative writing courses and social work and women's studies and all of those things that I found super fascinating, I could have stayed in school forever for. But then when the reality check hits and you're like, okay, but what am I actually going to do to make money and live on my own and have, some stability, the medical kind of came back into the forefront. My husband is an engineer, so he also was kind of a little bit more of, well, you might want to think about something in the medical field because that's a little more stable than something, the more artsy route. So ultimately, I came back to the UW and got into the PA program and ended up working for my dad for 16 plus years. And that was great. And I enjoyed working with my dad, and I enjoyed helping fix people in terms of their bodies. But there were always patients that would make me wonder, like, why didn't they do as well as other patients? There would be people that would come in and their x-rays didn't look as bad as what their actual pain felt. And they always were just kind of a little bit of a puzzle of, what's going on. And after my dad retired and I worked for an interventional spine clinic for a while, same thing. I mean, that's much more of a chronic pain situation. And it was just like, what is really driving some people to being more repetitive spinal injection type patients versus not? And so I've always been curious as to the kind of the missing piece. And so that's where functional medicine came in for me, because that is kind of a blend between conventional based medicine and more of an integrative, holistic approach. And so I really took a deep dive into learning more about functional medicine and getting certified through the Institute for Functional Medicine as one of their practitioners, and worked for a private practice in Fitchburg for a couple of years, again, until COVID hit. That was really interesting because it was just, instead of looking at a person from a more siloed approach of just orthopedics, it was looking at more of a big whole picture. And still, one of the pieces that was always a little bit missing for me was kind of the mind, body, spirit, that connection, and how the mind and the spirit are connected to the body. And it was during COVID that again became very apparent, that the mind and the spirit were connected to bodily function and what was going on the inside. At least that's what I noticed for myself. And then that's where journaling has kind of come full circle and has been helpful, because I've been able to feel what I feel on the inside, journal it on the page, kind of purge it that way, and then things just don't feel quite as heavy anymore on the inside.
I love that. Okay, there's a lot there. So first of all, zooming way out, I feel like, having watched you develop your career and trajectory through medicine and working with your dad, I think that that's something that I can feel and sense in the decades behind, but also in front of us, that's going to be something that will be a real treasure. Like, it always felt like a treasure that he was a surgeon, you were his physician assistant, and there's just some magic there that I really want to spend just a moment, a breath, to honor. And I think that as we grow older, and especially as our parents move on, from this earthly plane, I can imagine that being just a sweet pocket that you will hold tenderly, knowing your sensitivity. And so there's that. And then the missing piece and this idea of the puzzle. What I think is really curious is that there is this junction for you in COVID. Is it because things kind of shut down? Is it the health conundrum that we were and are subsequently still in? Like, what about that time put you in this other, I don't know, like almost like a vortex where time was holding still, but also kind of paused for you in a way that pulled you back into a place of reflection and pausing in your career?
It was more a little bit of like an identity crisis, to be honest, and a complete explosion of my ego. I had been working in orthopedic surgery, which is a well-respected field, and I had plenty of interesting stories to share when neighbors would get together or I would be meeting people for the first time. Same with the functional medicine clinic. That was new, and people were like, oh, tell me more about all of this. And then when COVID hit, the functional medicine clinic sold to a national business. And I did not end up becoming an employee of it because I didn't want to opt out of Medicare in order to be a provider there. So that's a whole kind of conundrum or issue that I was dealing with. And then the spine clinic just shut down prematurely. So truly it was, one day in January, where it was all of a sudden I didn't have either job anymore. And so then I'm just at home seemingly overnight, and our kids are home dealing with trying to figure out homeschooling and virtual schooling, and that bag of worms and angst and irritation and all of the feelings from our kids' perspective. But then I had kind of a complete identity crisis of who I was, because I wasn't out in the universe helping other people anymore. And I felt guilty about that because it was during a health crisis for a lot of people. And it was a little bit like, if I'm a physician assistant and I have training, maybe I should get myself back out there and be trying to help more people. But our kids couldn't be home alone. They were going through rough patches and trying to figure things out on their own. And my husband was busy still working and traveling for work. So there was, just all around a lot of uncertainty and concern about all of that. And so I think for me, it was more of just things had to almost blow up in order to create a space and time. Okay, I have nowhere to go anymore. And so it's just me and the kids, and we can only hang out with each other for so long before we all start to go crazy. So I would take long walks at the dog park, listening to slow, sad music and just thinking about, where did my life go wrong and where am I going to go from here? And really just thinking, what would actually bring me some joy again. And so it was through asking those really hard questions that I've kind of come to a new understanding of just my inherent needs that I think I pushed aside for a long time in order to treat others.
So many people, I think, who might be listening to this could potentially identify with this identity crisis that you're talking about. And one thing that, as a close friend of yours, I know is that you did not return to conventional medicine after COVID. So there's this piece where not only did COVID put some things on pause because of logistics and just the way that the world was at that moment in time, you have since journeyed over the past, now it's about 4 years, away from that spine clinic and that functional medicine role. And you didn't circle back to that. I think some people, like for myself in schools, we definitely had a pause and a, full halt, but eventually we eased our way back into classrooms. That's not the exact same for you. And I think what I want to bring that up for is because I find it almost like the most brave thing that you had this, just, I guess as an artist, like visual artist, the visual that's coming to my mind is like the layers of self sort of falling away. So this like layer of like, I'm a physician assistant. Here are my credentials and qualifications. Like, here's what I'm contributing to the world. Like all of those things sort of peeling back. And then what remains is like that true sort of light and ember. So I'm wondering, was that a conscious decision that you made that you did not return back to medicine? Was it, and this might be like a little bit of a tricky conversation that could take us a little bit longer to answer, but I feel like it's an important part for someone listening who is like, I'm there, I'm peeling back the layers, like I'm with you in that identity crisis mode. What would you say to that moment, or how did you decide not to circle back?
Yeah, it was definitely a very conscious decision. It still is, to be honest. About every couple weeks, maybe at this point, I'll have a little bit of a moment or a thought of like, what am I doing? And where should I be going? And should I go back, or should I keep searching for something new? And I think ultimately, I think it was just my nervous system knew that I couldn't handle going back into conventional medicine. I think I could probably do it now, but I think it would undo a lot of the healing that I've been working so hard to achieve thus far. So I think for so much of my growing up and even working in the medical field, it was a proving to myself that I could do it. It was like, I am woman, hear me roar. And I want everyone to know that I'm as strong as everybody else and that I can do this job just as good as anybody else can, if not better. I think I've always had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, just being a younger sibling and having an older brother, to be like, I'm going to prove myself to the world and how tough I am. But the truth is, I was tired, just tired. And so once my
Mm.
world kind of just blew up, there was kind of the crisis of like, I didn't ask for this, and kind of the pushing against that of, I don't want it because I didn't ask for it. But then there was, well, now that it's here, I don't want to go back either. So what does that mean? And then having to figure that out. But yeah, my husband has said so many times along the way, he's like, I don't know how you do it, because I would have gone back to anything just to get out of the house. I would have gone and worked, anywhere just to not be by myself with my own thoughts about not doing anything. But I think I just knew you have to take some time. I have a necklace that has a little pause symbol on it, and I would wear it all the time back then to just remind myself to just slow down and take a breath and not worry about trying to get to the next thing or trying to prove that I can push through, but rather than, just listening, just really paying attention to what my body is saying. And my body was saying, I'm tired.
Yeah. When you're in this phase, is this where you found the journal to self kind of concept in your training, or talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once I started journaling again myself, and I could feel and sense like, oh man, I've missed this and this is helpful. And then kind of, I wonder why this is so helpful. Like, it's like I always knew it was helpful, but I was just kind of more of, I wonder if there's been any research as to why this is helpful. And so I just started Google searching journaling as a form of mental health recovery and as a mental health tool. And there's so much information that came up about journaling as a form of therapy and how it can be a very useful, accessible tool that anyone can use. You don't have to have necessarily a therapist in order to write down your own thoughts with pen and paper. But in that kind of research mode that I was in, I found this company called Center for Journal Therapy in Colorado. And so I started looking into that, and they offered all kinds of really cool programs and classes under a larger umbrella called the Therapeutic Writing Institute. And one of the courses that they offered was this workshop called Journal to the Self, and it was teaching 18 different journaling techniques and kind of how using different techniques can open up and access different parts of mind, body, and spirit. And so I was really curious about that because I didn't even really realize there were different journaling techniques. I mean, I always just kind of wrote a little bit more from like a Springboard prompt situation, or, even when I was younger, more of a Dear Diary, here's what my day consisted of. So I was curious to find out more about actual techniques and what different techniques do. And so when I was looking at the Journal to the Self workshop, there was this Journal to the Self instructor certification. And me being a little bit of a type A recovering perfectionist was like, well, I mean, might as well get certified in this if I'm interested in it, as opposed to just taking the workshop, because part of the certification meant you had to take the workshop. So I was like, all right, I'll do both. So I did both of those things to become certified in order to teach these Journal to the Self workshops, and just found it all very interesting. And that's now, as from a health perspective, what I'm kind of more interested in is learning how the mind and the body are connected, and to really listen to one in order to change the other, and vice versa. And so, yeah, I'm trying to kind of create spaces for people to do their own journaling and teach different techniques to them. in order to open up their discovery and personal growth, just like it did for me.
All right, we've referred to this a couple of times, so I want to make sure to clarify. When you say springboard prompts, can you kind of explain what that is to the person who might be like, I have no idea what springboard, they're getting a visual of a vault or of some kind in
Right.
mind.
Yeah.
What does it mean if they're curious about that?
A springboard prompt is really just like an open-ended question. So, it could be something as simple of like, if I were to talk to my fear today, what would I say? And, you go from there. Or, you know, what makes me happy? And you go from there. So those kind of things, they can also be almost like a poem or a set of thoughts that you can read, and then that jogs your thought process or a memory of something else. So you can pick out kind of like a singular word or a singular phrase out of a longer piece of work, like a poem, and go from there. So springboards, I think, are really helpful just because you're not trying to just go from a blank page to how am I going to say this, or what am I going to say, and where do I even start? I find them to be a helpful technique.
I think you mentioned something like 18 or something that you are trained in. Is there one or two besides springboards? And not to put you on the spot here, but what else if somebody, so you kind of mentioned the Dear Diary, that's, it's interesting. My experience is like, I remember reading Diary of Anne Frank as a child and using this concept of like cataloging my life as how I was writing. And then my own journey took a winding path. But what are some other techniques besides springboard or like a Dear Diary, like life jot that you have found people gravitate towards or that are particularly helpful?
Yeah, a lot of people gravitate towards captured moments. So that's almost thinking about like a picture, like a Polaroid picture or something, that you can completely imagine all of the senses of that picture, what things looked like, what the weather was like, who was there, what they were wearing, what it smelled like, what the food tasted like, all of that. And you're taking that picture in your mind and then you're writing everything about it in a very descriptive way. So people like captured moments, especially when they're trying to capture a happy moment or a joyful moment, a lot of times around like a holiday or a wedding or, a birth or something like that. So captured moments is a good one. On the flip side, unsent letters can also be extremely helpful. And those are letters that you would write with the intention of never sending. So typically that's more for maybe a harder time in your life or a difficult conversation that you would maybe not want to say in person because you would be afraid of what the aftermath would be. So you kind of just write it all out as to what you would like to say to someone or what you imagine could happen. And then you can either burn it to the ground or you can shred it up or you can save it, but you never actually send it to the person. So a lot of people find unsent letters to be helpful for family drama and trauma and things like that, if they're writing to siblings or parents or grandparents or whatnot. There's also one called List of 100, which I think I've really found to be more challenging than I ever thought it would be. So you pick a topic and you have to list 100 things, and you can't do 20 at a time. You have to sit there and list out all 100 kind of in that one sitting. So it was interesting when I was doing the workshop. I think my topic that I had picked was like 100 things that piss me off. And that was extremely easy to fill out in comparison to 100 things that bring me joy. And so then that really was eye opening. It was like, oh, okay, I've got some work to do here. I got to figure out what actually makes me happy because I know what makes me extremely unhappy. And so that can be a good resource if it is something like 100 things that make you happy or bring you joy that you can always look back on when you're going through a hard time. You can be like, okay, what is it again? Where's my safe zone? And you can reread through those and kind of go, okay, I got to do one of these.
Yeah. Wow. I love all of those recommendations. We can put a little bit more in the show notes about those. So, for the person who's listening and trying to piece together what your work life looks like now as it relates to writing, is it something that you do on the regular, or are there like retreat type formats, or how is it that you are able to guide people if they're just kind of really intrigued by this concept? Because it sounds so therapeutic and just like heart enriching what you're talking about.
Yeah, I am putting together a retreat with a friend from high school, believe it or not. She is also a physician assistant. So we are putting together a retreat on Saturday, November 9th. That's a 1-day retreat at Aldo Leopold Nature Center. And it includes a series of different movements and techniques that kind of help regulate one's nervous system. So Emma's portion talks more about corrective movement and stretching and breath work and ice bath immersion. And my portion is more about journaling, specific to using journaling as a technique to become aware of what nervous system state you're in and how to toggle between both kind of the rested parasympathetic nervous system state and more of the sympathetic fight or flight state. So it helps kind of build resilience. And so the workshop itself is called Reawaken, Rewire, Recharge. And so I'm excited about that. That's like a big, all day situation that we're putting together. And other than that, I'm busy working on other themed, smaller, shorter journaling workshops. And my ideal would be that people would reach out and I could help put together a workshop based around however many participants someone would want and pick out a couple of the journaling techniques, and we can work through that together in a workshop form that's a little bit of a shorter format than the full 12-week Journal to the Self workshop itself. And so those I'm interested in almost using as like a pampered chef party, only like a journaling party. So anyone who's interested, who has a group of friends that would like to get together and try doing something like that together instead of going out and painting and wine for the night, you could do journaling and wine or journaling and mocktails or whatever. So for writers out there who are interested in, creating together, that's what I'm interested in offering.
I love that. I love that so much. Okay, so I want to go into kind of thinking about a person who is in a state of reimagining or revisioning their life. Okay. There is obviously like COVID now, right? We look back and that the mystery of the mind is that it can be like much shorter in in our experience, in our memory, than it actually felt at the time. So I think when somebody is in a space that we kind of talked about earlier of the layers peeling away, and they're sitting with their need to rest, they're sitting with what their nervous system needs, they're sitting with facing who am I without these credentials or the bits of my resume. What are the key, like either practices or bits of advice that you have for the person in that space where like the days are just like molasses, like they're just going slowly, you know what I mean? And they are just trying to kind of wake up, look at themselves in the mirror and begin again. What is something that they can take right from this as you have rebuilt from that place and reimagine? That is life, right? Like we are continually reimagining and revisioning. But for that really slow and particularly painful place, what are the pieces of advice or practices that you have?
Well, it's so funny because on one hand, I grew up very much in a culture and a family that is, you got to pick yourself up, you got to keep going, basically fake it till you make it type of situation. And so there's a part of me that had to fight against that again actively. So it was difficult because you're feeling very unproductive in a sense. And I think there is a lot of work that I had to do just to let that go. I actually had a magnet that I had on the fridge that said your worth is not based on your productivity, that I would look at every day, because I very much did not believe that for a large chunk of my life. So it was helpful for me, although it was also difficult to have young kids, because it was very apparent that I wasn't going to just leave them. It was very apparent that they need me just as much as I need them during this difficult phase. But the thing that kind of helped me get through the most was, again, just following what I was curious with. I think I've been a lifelong learner. And I think that for a long time, I channeled my learning into specific things. Like when I worked in orthopedics, I was reading a lot of orthopedic journals and, really becoming kind of a master of that domain. But when everything kind of went sideways, it was, okay, what piques my curiosity? And I tend to go down big research kind of rabbit holes of that, or trying out new things. And I had to let go of the idea that I'm going to do something with all of this information that I'm learning. I mean, some of it was just learning about it so then I could say, yeah, you know what, it doesn't really interest me that much more beyond this. But I really kind of explored and looked at a bunch of different career ideas and options, just because it was like, if I am going to reinvent myself, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And for me, I also found it very helpful to do something that created a flow state. So for myself, that was going back and doing ceramics work on a pottery wheel. And so I remember taking ceramics classes once things opened up enough, but you still had to wear masks, and finding myself getting lost in a 4-hour window and being like, oh, that felt good. Felt good to be concentrating on something else other than myself for a 4-hour chunk of time. And it was sensory. And so I took ceramics in high school, so it probably channeled some inner memories of that. So being in a flow state was really helpful for me. I started reading again, like actual fiction books. I hadn't read a fiction book in I don't know how many years, because I would just fall asleep instantly the second I would try to start reading anything. And I remember that being extremely difficult. Like I remember only being able to read like 2 pages before then my mind would start to totally scatter with, my things to do list and all of the other things that I'm worried about. So I had to basically like relearn how to slow down enough to read a fictional book. But now I really enjoy that. So I would strategically put myself in quiet places. Like I went to the dog park almost every day with the dog, or out in the woods. And again, I have a memory of walking my childhood dog through the woods back in the day. So I think that kind of brought back some visceral core memories that were soothing to me. And music was really big for me. I had all different types of playlists. I have one that's called Mental Health Playlist that I put together that still brings me right back to that time. Yeah, so all of those things were helpful for me, but everyone is so different, For some people, the idea of being in a ceramics class probably sounds terrible. I don't know.
I love, though, that just where there's flow, right? It might be running on a trail. It might be in a creative setting. That flow state is a really key part. Having watched your journey as a writer from just the writing community that we both are a part of, but also as a very close friend, and really like watching, right? Like we've watched each other grow up, I've watched a softening over the course of years where it felt like with the departure of kind of all of the things that I would say were part of your like medical self and medical life, a lot of the critic seemed to sort of soften her edges when I would listen to you read or even like watch you encounter your own words, right? Because as writers, like we get it out on the paper and then, oh, there's so many things that happen, right? Like it's a wrestling, sometimes it's a succumbing to, but I feel like there were years where I would internally be like, oh, I wish she would be a little more gentle with herself. Whether it was like giving like sort of cautionary statements before you'd read or sort of the critique after you would read. And I've really watched that dissipate in the sense that I feel like now, and maybe over the course of the last maybe even decade of watching you create and produce and then process and then share, I feel like I've seen just this, the word that was coming to me as I was preparing to speak to you was like a ripening, like just this like real softness, which I feel is like, that's the rich goal, right? Of like our aging process, that we can just let those really hard edges of the boxes that we used to fit in, like break open and be just more and more true to who we want to be, but also true to ourselves. So I know you've brought a couple of things to read today. And as we were kind of talking about this beforehand, you were saying, oh, I'm going to read about softening. So would you ever do us the honor of reading that for us?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's true. You know, I think that there has been a softening and not a complete quieting of my inner critic, but kind of a shift. So I think of, I used to have a very, very loud drill sergeant voice in my head. And again, I think just going through the medical field training, there is a lot of that type of drill sergeant type voice that is instructed to you. And there's not room for a lot of errors when you're dealing with people's lives and things like that. And so there is a lot of pressure that way. So you get pretty hard on yourself when you do make mistakes. But at this stage in my life, I like to try to shift from more of a drill sergeant voice to more of like a coach, and a coach that I would actually like to have, as opposed to, you know, like a Bobby Knight style coach. So that's what I've been attempting to shift over the last couple of years. That doesn't work every day, but you know, always a work in progress. So this is something I wrote that was titled Soften. Softening is something I have been working on for the last 2 to 3 years. And what is now evident is that it's impossible for me to soften with others if I am unable to do so with myself. And so enter the work of self-compassion. I like the idea of self-softening much better than self-compassion. And it feels more visceral too, like a stick of butter that has been left on the counter in order to make cookie dough. And sometimes I check it and it's very soft from the sunshine shining down on it. And then the next day it takes on its harder form again, although still softer than when it first came out of the fridge. Sometimes I feel myself softening, my walls and force fields of protection weakening, and other times I am right back to reformation, bordering on unspreadable and yet different from my original form.
If I were to take a line from that as a springboard, I might take the very last, different from my original form. Is that what the very last line is?
Yeah, that'd be a good springboard.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Joe. What else do you have for us?
Another one I have is titled, What I've Been Wanting to Tell You. I've been wanting to tell you that I miss you. I miss doing crafts together, watching Murder, She Wrote while eating microwave popcorn, and playing Pony Canasta at your kitchen table together. I'm also sad that I wasn't able to get to know you as well as I wanted. It was intentional on your part, I'm sure. Keep some walls up so that no one can peek inside your heartbreak and sorrow. That is the way you carried on and continued to live life, I suppose. If you were still around, I would want to ask you about that way of processing or not processing the trauma you experienced. I am sure that you would give me a pursed lip, side-eyed glance, that was clear that you did not want to revisit and discuss it. Although I am not built that way, where I can bottle up all the negative feelings and not let them escape. I am more like a dam that has been broken, and all my feelings are pouring over the sides. I am curious how you came to be. And that was actually based on kind of an unsent letter.
I feel like it's unsent and yet it's totally sent. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I could picture people that I imagined that was about in your own life. And I think that's the magic of the process, right? You write it out and then like there's this piece of like it has been released, even if it doesn't reach the hands or physically,
exactly.
Right? The physical realm of that person.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the power in it, right?
Right. Totally. Yep. And, sometimes unsent letters, just like now, you wouldn't send them to the person that you're writing them to, but maybe you would decide to share them with someone who doesn't know the person that you're writing about and has no personal connection to it. And again, it's just a way of feeling heard and known, but then you don't have to actually make it a thing between you and the other person. Or it's a form of closure if the person's no longer, around anymore. If it's like I wrote that about a grandma who has since passed away. So it's not like I could send her the letter anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
I have one more. And this was based on a springboard that I took out of it called "The Unsettledness Made You Keep Seeking." Have I been unsettled my entire life? Because I am a lifelong seeker, that is for sure. What is it that I am trying to find or figure out? I feel like for so many years I have sought out to prove myself and my worth. If I received a good grade, a compliment from a patient, acknowledgement for all my hard work from my dad or husband, it satiated the flip-flopping in my stomach. But only for a moment. Because we all know it is impossible to please or impress everyone, just as it is impossible to accomplish everything you set out to do. But I did try, for so long, but not anymore. I am no longer seeking answers to my questions, because the truth is that the answer depends, as it all has to be taken into context. There is no always right or wrong, just an assload of the messy middle. What I am seeking now and what I long for is an ease, a settled internal barometer. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right, as Goldilocks would have it. Is it even possible or reasonable to be settled in the world in which we live? I feel like even when I find ease, it evades those closest to me and prevents peace.
Well, I think we are in the messy middle, right? If we are afforded a long life and we look back over the time that we have spent knowing each other, but even before that, and then looking forward, the messy middle of burning away the layers, coming to just that's the piece I want to honor the most, Jo, is the space of getting really clear with that ember inside. And I want to honor that softening that you've just embarked on and continue to with bravery, and also engaging with your kids in a way that has, it's a whole nother episode, right, of talking about how this has shaped your journey as a mother and raising them in a way with this super sensitive heart. So I love that so much. We have, just to close, a few stream of consciousness, like quick write type prompts. I don't know. You probably have the technical term for these. I guess they're springboards, right? You're just going to fill in the blank, but it's like, right, not a lot of thought.
Got okay. It. Lightning round.
So whatever comes to you in this lightning round. So, all right. The most important thing about living or loving is
telling the truth. Be honest with yourself.
I'm sleeping here.
Exactly. Peel the layers.
We're getting honest, real, and truth telling here. Okay. The best way to accept your way of being is to.
Oof. this is a tough one because this is what I'm still working on, is to treat yourself as you would have wanted to be treated when you were young. Not how you would treat yourself now, because sometimes I can be pretty harsh with myself now. But if I think about if I were 7 or 8, what would I have wanted my parents to say to me? Then I can come up with that answer.
Feeling deeply has taught me.
Oh, it has taught me a lot of things. It's taught me how hard life can be. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why people build up walls and force fields who are, highly sensitive people to begin with, is that we have such deep feelings, and sometimes it just feels too much. It's too much sorrow, it's too much pain, it's too much. And so we try to toughen ourselves up in a way. Yeah.
And to kind of circle back just to the truth telling of that, right? Like, I'm thinking about you training yourself and then others into that mind, body, spirit connection, that if a highly sensitive person is listening who is building walls or just now becoming aware of the walls, just becoming aware that, oh, this is what this is around me, that the very first step to removing that barrier or breaking through is to be honest that it's there in the first place.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And then to find people that are safe enough to bring the walls down around. Because, there's a reason why they're there in the beginning. Most kids build them up, in grade school and middle school when kids are awful to each other. And so, it's not as easy as just saying, well, just tear it all down. It's like, well, it was there for a reason. And there are some people that it's actually not a good idea to take your walls down around. So you have to figure out who those people are, which for me has definitely been the Spilling journaling circle, which that's one of the lifesavers of it.
I love that. Where can people find you if they're curious about learning more, whether or not they hear this in time for your upcoming workshop or are finding you later down the path? Where should they look for you?
Well, the workshop information, if people are interested, they can go to madisonwellnessretreats.com, and that will take people to an Eventbrite page where they can log on and register for the November 9th retreat. Otherwise, I am not super present on social media, I gotta say. And that also is a little bit of a conscious decision on my part at the moment. But I do get on Instagram probably more than any others. And my handle is just Joanna, M as in Marie, Hutchins. So people could find me there.
Awesome.
By Firelight is a Lit Path Studios production and is produced by Jamie Gale and Betsy Delzer. Music is by Legito Music and Pond 5. Thank you for being a part of our beautiful collection of stories.